Hello to everyone and anyone who has found this channel on the internet. Mandela Effect Decoded was established in February of 2017. And at present, the stats say that I have something like 3,500 subscribers. However, the channel has not been active for a while. There have been no uploads for several months. And I'm making this talk to explain, in the first place, why I created the channel and what it achieved, and to just leave you with a short note on what I'm doing lately and where you can go from here to follow my work should you desire to do so. To begin, I'll tell you about how I discovered the Mandela Effect, how and when, and how I proceeded from that point, and what were my motivations and intentions in undertaking a study of that phenomenon. If you look on Google Trends for the Mandela Effect and set the time frame to 5 years, you will find that it shows that the Mandela Effect reached its highest peak in 2016, and it did so from a starting point in July or August of 2016. So if you examine the graph, you'll see that there is a vertical spike to the 100 mark on the Google Trends scale that almost occurs overnight in July and August of 2016. And so it peaks at that time, and then there are a couple of peaks after that as well. And today it is more or less leveled out. So it's fair to say that I came in to the investigation of the Mandela Effect at the exact moment when interest in it peaked in an unparalleled manner. Or to put it the other way around, interest in the Mandela Effect peaked at the moment that it had my interest. You could read it that way. I'm not making this up. It is a fact. And let me give you the concrete details. There are 6 significant points on the Google Trend graph which show peaks of interest in the Mandela Effect. And I'll cover each of those points briefly because they have an illustrative value. In the first place, there is the low peak of late July 2016, and then the leap in August 14th through 20th, the leap to the highest point of interest. So in 2 weeks, interest in the Mandela Effect leaped to the highest point. When was this? Well, in July and the beginning of August 2016, I was looking at the Mandela Effect for the first time. I think that during the early months of 2016 must have been the time when Mandela Effect showed up in my feed over and over again. And I just ignored it. I was not interested. I thought, oh, this is another annoying, stupid trend on the internet. It's another demented fantasy of some kind that's being built into a revelation. Whatever. I just ignored it until June, around the summer solstice of June 2019. And at that moment, I went and I looked at what the Mandela Effect was. I can almost remember the exact day. And the minute that I looked at it, I realized what it was. I saw what kind of signal was coming through the Mandela Effect. Needless to say, I was extremely excited. And through the month of July, I continued to investigate it. I built up a small inventory of cases of the Mandela Effect. I reviewed most of the active channels at that time. And then in the first week of August 2016, indicated on the Google graph as the high point of the Mandela effect in the past 5 years, I had a confirmation coming to me of a specific case of the Mandela effect that confirmed to me that my interpretation of it up until that point was correct. So I had only spoken to one person. I'd only shared with one person, hey, I discovered this thing, the Mandela effect, which has been around for a while. There's a lot of channels dealing with it, and this is what I think it is, speaking as a Gnostic teacher. So I spoke to a student, an ally, who knows the Gnostic material deeply, and I said, hey, listen here, I have a strong feeling that there is ample evidence, which I can prove, that the Mandela effect is a signal that I can identify based on Gnostic intel. So I built up my case for the Mandela effect for the investigation that I was to set up. During these 6 weeks, end of June through July, and then in the first week of August 2016, there was a Mandela effect relating to the song California Dreamin' by the Mamas and the Papas. And I explain in the uploads of the Mandela effect on this channel the paramount significance of that one particular effect. And I explain in clear and thorough detail how it was a confirmation that I was on the right track in presuming that I could decode the Mandela effect. It was a staggering confirmation. It was as if the signals coming through the Mandela effect were now directly coming to my attention, so that the source of the effect could inform me that it knew that I was on to the signal. So if you get what I'm saying here, you'll appreciate that one of the points that I made in the Mandela Effect talks, running to about 75, I think, one of the points that I continually reiterated and proved in my investigation was that certain Mandela effects were signals coming from a particular supernatural source, which I could identify and did identify. And I emphasized that the signaling process was interactive. So if the source of the Mandela effect became aware that there were human individuals who were detecting the signals it was transmitting and following the signals correctly, then it would affirm that by continuing to send signals to support the interactivity. And all through the uploads that I produced from February of 2017 until the end of that year, I demonstrated in individual cases in meticulous detail how this interactivity between the source of the Mandela effect and those who were tracking it correctly played out. So there I've indicated 2 moments indicated by the Google Trend graph when interest in the Mandela effect peaked. Now I'd like to bring your attention to 4 other moments. Well, it just so happens that at those 4 other exact moments when interest in the Mandela effect and traffic about it peaked, I was doing something of particular relevance to the working of the Mandela effect. I was releasing material and presenting an ongoing investigation and decoding. And in that investigation, there were critical moments. There were breakthrough moments. And you will find that the uploads that went onto my channel are dated to those moments. So what were those moments? Well, the next moment, number 3, in the sequence I want to bring to your attention, was October of 2016. That was about 4 months or so since I had looked into the Mandela Effect. I had decided to pull up some of the clips, some of the videos that were in my feed, and find out what this phenomenon was about. And I had already, over those 4 months, developed a considerable range of data that supported my view of the source and purpose of the Mandela Effect. But I hadn't said anything about it publicly. But then, in October of 2016, when there was another significant peak, that was exactly the time when I came out of what I call a radio silence that I had been in for a year. So from October of 2015 to October of 2016, I didn't release any talks on the internet. It was a period when I decided to run silent, run deep. And when I came out of that, I founded a new feature on my website, midhistory.org, called Mythophrenia. I founded Mythophrenia in October of 2016. And one of the reasons that I did that was so that I would have a platform where I could describe and share and impart my decoding of the Mandela Effect. So the moment that I took the action to do that, there was a peak of interest in the Mandela Effect. So which came first, the chicken or the egg? So then again, there was a peak in January going into February of 2017, and it was in January of 2017 that I actually set up Mandela Effect Decoded, and in February, early in February, it went online. So the moment that I set up a channel to present my Gnostic decoding of the Mandela Effect, lo and behold, there was another peak of interest in the world at large, even though no one in the world knew about the channel or the intention of it or the intel behind it and the background and all of the deep investigation and correlation that I brought to it. No one in the world knew anything about that, but there was a peak of interest in the Mandela Effect at that moment. Okay, coming to the final 2 points. In September of 2018, there was a peak in the Mandela Effect, which has been gradually fading out since a year and a half before that. And I talk extensively about the phasing out of the Mandela Effect and how and why it is phasing out. But in September of 2018, well, I had already completed my investigation of the Mandela Effect a little less than a year before. And what happened in the first week of September 2018 that would have been relevant to my particular activity all by my lonesome, but at the same time would have been implicated by or would have implicated me in the interest in the Mandela Effect. Well, what happened? Well, in the first weeks of 2018, I was intensely occupied in setting up my site, the Sophianic School of Arts and Sciences, at nemata.org. And there are 12 courses available, 12 courses of study open at nemata.org. And one of them is the course in Mythophrenia. And in the course in Mythophrenia, in the content of that course, I transferred all of the material that I had published on Mandela Effect Decoded. So there's no longer any material, any videos or uploads on this channel as you listen to this talk. Why not? Because in the first week of September 2018, when there was one of the final peaks of interest in the Mandela Effect, I put the talks that were on the channel on private setting, and I transferred all of the material over to Nemata, where that material will be available in a edited form and in a user-friendly, structured manner. It will be available in the course entitled Mythophrenia, which I set up in October of 2016 when there was a peak of interest in the Mandela Effect. Are you following my drift? I'm not making any of this up. In fact, the proof of it is that one could go to the dates that are the timestamps of my talks and my work that I'm referring to here. look at the timestamps of when that work was written or posted, and you'll see that it corresponds precisely to these points of peak interest, even though nobody knew about me and nobody knew what I was doing, except those few thousand people who had subscribed to Mandela Effect Decoded. And I want to point out in this context that during the time that it was online and active, and in the subsequent year when it was just floating online and not active, well, my channel, although it has a really enticing title, Mandela Effect Decoded, what do you mean? How could anyone decode it? Never got any interest from other channels. At that time, there was I can recall, there were about maybe 8 or 10 highly active channels where people were constantly posting about the Mandela Effect. Perhaps I missed it, but I never saw any traffic going out, back or forth, outgoing or incoming from my comment sections to those other channels. And as far as I know, I did not receive traffic. No one who came to my channel announced that they were coming from these other channels. Or if there was some cross action between my channels and the other channels, which were immensely popular, it was minor. It was extremely slight. So how does it happen that my activities in tracking the Mandela Effect correspond to moments of peak interest? Finally, I bring you to the last date, which is August of 2019. So this is just a month ago. And here you see the last little bleep or peak of the Mandela Effect as it is gradually declining. The interest or traffic regarding that search item is declining. Well, what happened in August of 2019 in my activities that was relevant to the Mandela Effect? Well, just previous to that time, I posted material, the first block of studies in course 10 on mythophrenia on Nemata. So even though that material did not include any of the massive and meticulous content of my Mandela Effect Decoded uploads, it referred directly to the initiation of my study of the Mandela Effect. Remember, I initiated that study throughout the summer of 2016, and then I went online with it in the fall of 2016. And that's when I introduced the meme of mythophrenia. So I used the meme of mythophrenia as a way of describing the kind of state of mind that goes along with detecting and working interactively with Mandela Effect. It was the code word for interactivity. So then when I, in the summer of 2019, this year, when I reinitiated mythophrenia on my school, there was the final last peak of interest in the Mandela Effect. How do you figure that? There's nobody knows what's happening on my school. I haven't promoted it. I haven't linked it. So far, it hasn't been picked up by the Google spiders or the algorithms. So how can this be? I also want to make another point, which I find illustrative. I think it will speak for itself. In the final phase of my working the channel toward the fall of 2017, I actually reached out to someone else on the internet. I've never done this before in my life. I did so with a specific intention to discuss the Mandela Effect and to ask this individual, who had quite an active site going, quite a fan base, a lot more subscriptions than myself, a gentleman in Texas, to ask him, well, look, I have created this whole channel where I'm decoding the Mandela Effect, and would you be interested to know the results of my investigation? And he said, no. We actually recorded an interview, which was posted somewhere on one of my related channels. I don't know if it's still up. And in this interview, I asked him point blank if he would be interested in seeing the results of how I decoded the signal. Because I claim that I have seen a signal coming through the Mandela Effect that is a coherent message. And I constructed this message on the basis of the meticulous examination of something like 70 or 80 outstanding Mandela effects, and I pieced them together in the form of a master jigsaw puzzle. And I said, hey, you've been talking about the Mandela Effect like many other people for months now. Would you like to know the message that I have found encoded in the Mandela Effect? And he said, no. So just thought I'd report on that little incident. Make of it what you can. Also, while I'm on it, there's another incident I'd really like to bring to your attention because it's remarkable. If you go into the search bar for YouTube and you put in Lisa Harrison plus John Lash plus Mandela Effect, you'll find that at the top of the feed, you get a response. There is an upload entitled Sophia, Lucifer, and the Mandela Effect. And the date of that upload is October 9th, 2016. Remember, I already mentioned that date. It was the third date in the sequence that I've laid out here. So, why did I talk to Lisa Harrison in October of 2016? Well, I leaked the Mandela Effect Decoded project that I was working on in that talk. I talked to her specifically in that interview, which is still on the internet today. It's on her channel. It has something like 46,000 views. You can see the timestamp of the date that it was uploaded, and that corresponds to that peak that you see on the Google Trends chart. So here I am, John Lash, coming out for the first time. I'm rather well known on the internet. There's hundreds of hours in interviews, hundreds and hundreds of uploads. But here I am talking about the Mandela Effect. Here is my name associated with the Mandela Effect in a YouTube upload, and the interest peaks at that moment. So one thing I want to point out about what happened with the Lisa Harrison interview is I leaked, as I say, my investigation. I leaked my ongoing study, and I came out with some hints about how I regard the Mandela Effect. And one of the points that I made in that talk, the main point, in fact, call it a claim if you want, I claimed that I had identified the source of the Mandela Effect. And I identified it as a supernatural agency working into the human mind in a very particular way, in a precise way, which I was able to describe on many occasions in the uploads to the channel when I eventually opened the channel 5 months later. Well, what happened? Well, Lisa Harrison at that moment, shortly after that interview in which I said, I reckon the Mandela Effect is a signal coming from a supernatural agency, Lisa Harrison turned around and came on the internet claiming that a supernatural agency called Lilu had overtaken her keyboard and that it was using the internet and using her physical keyboard of her computer to communicate a message to her. So what Lisa Harrison basically did is she hijacked my idea, she hijacked my proposition, which was the simple statement of my investigation, the premise of my investigation. She hijacked it and turned it into a game that she played for a while, in which she claimed to be receiving messages from this supernatural source. And that all petered out and came to nothing because, in fact, the content of what she produced was banal, insignificant, and to a certain degree ludicrous. So she couldn't keep the game running. In the meantime, I went on in February of the next year, 2017, to launch my full spectrum investigation of the Mandela Effect. At that time, at the very outset of the channel, I declared that it would take 64 uploads for me to present to the world an accurate, adequate, and complete treatment of my decoding of the Mandela Effect. And that's what it took, plus some. 64 and then some. So between February of 2016 and October of November, I uploaded that many clips to the channel. Now, needless to say, that's a lot of material. I not only uploaded, let's say, probably over 100 hours, well over 100 hours of discourse, but I also had tracking pages, and there was a tremendous amount of printed material. There were tracking pages on metahistory.org. So with each upload, you could link to metahistory.org and you could read the tracking pages and you could see an enormous amount of textual, visual evidence that I presented to support my investigation. Now, all of that material is currently in migration. Well, not in migration. It is actually now in the confines of the school, in the archives and files of the school, and it will be restructured and reformatted for presentation as a course in Mythophrenia, course 10 of Nemata. So now, proceeding as rapidly as I can, let me cover 5 particular points that I have selected as the outstanding points to describe how I decoded the Mandela Effect. In the first place, I set up rigorous criteria to determine what are actual, verifiable, and trustworthy Mandela effects to distinguish them from trivial or spurious effects. So, as in any experiment, I set up test criteria so that the evidence that I brought to my case could be held to a high standard of proof. For instance, I insisted that there be verifiable residue, evidence of residue of a Mandela effect. Otherwise, I discarded it as dubious or questionable. So, using that filtering system, I was nevertheless able to amass a considerable number of verifiable Mandela effects. Second thing I did in the investigation was that I identified the supernatural agency producing the Mandela effect. And I did that meticulously and with great care, using quite a number of interrelated talks and using a considerable amount of textual material, which was posted on what I called the tracking pages. As a matter of fact, if you collected all the tracking pages that I generated during the investigation, you would probably have an illustrated book of something like 200 pages. So you could say there exists a 200-page, densely documented and footnoted and illustrated manual that came out along with the spoken material coming from Mandela Effect Decoded. So I identified the source of the signal, and I explained how the signal works. How did I identify the source of the signal? What did I identify as the source of the signals coming through the Mandela Effect in a coherent message to the world? Well, I called it, the source, the PSI. That stands for Planetary Sovereign Intelligence. So one of the claims I made in the course of the investigation was that the Mandela Effect is coming from the mind of the Earth itself, from the intelligence of the planet, or the planetary entelechy. Now, in Gnostic teachings, the name of the planetary entelechy is Sophia, or the Aeon Sophia, not to be pronounced like a woman's name, Sophia. So I identified the Aeon Sophia of Gnostic teachings as the sovereign intelligence of the planet Earth. And that was the source of the Mandela Effect. Furthermore, as a third point, I showed that the way that I made that identification, I didn't just claim it, I just come out and I didn't speculate, I didn't invent it. I supported it by material. I supported it by evidence that any sane and sober person could confirm on their own terms. So I pointed out that the Mandela Effect could be decoded by the use of something that is called a cipher book. That's an actual word. CIPHERBOOK. So what is a cipher book? Well, it's nothing so mysterious. It's in fact it's known to be an essential tool in cryptography, which is the science of writing codes and breaking codes. So, for instance, the example I like to use is Moby Dick. Take a particular edition of the novel Moby Dick, published in 1850, by Herman Melville. Now you write a code using Moby Dick as the cipher book. So I go to page 22 of Moby Dick, I go down to line 27 in that page, and I go across to the 6th letter. So then I have a 3-letter sequence: 22, 27, 6. And that is a letter. That gives the letter F. But you don't know that that 3-letter sequence gives the letter F unless you have the cipher book, which is the tool that enables you to decode, to break the code, to break the cipher and read the cipher. Is that clear enough? So what did I identify as the cipher book for the Mandela Effect code? What did I identify as the actual existing text existing in the world that would allow you to crack the cipher of the Mandela Effect and read how it is written, and to read what is written, what is coming through, what message is coming through that particular configuration of signals that can be detected in a selected number of Mandela effects. Turns out, and I prove this, I provide massive evidence, and I build that evidence into a systematic proof. I prove that the cipher book for breaking the Mandela Effect code is the so-called Nag Hammadi library. And this consists of a body of 52 texts that are written in a Greek Coptic kind of language, Coptic based on Greek, perhaps on Greek originals, and it is one of the most well-known texts in the world. It is in fact considered to be, along with the Dead Sea Scrolls, the most significant and unparalleled archaeological discovery of ancient texts of the entire 20th century. Discovered in December 1945, has been translated into English around 1976, translated into many languages. Thousands of books and commentaries have been written about the Nag Hammadi codices, as they're called, the Nag Hammadi library. And what is the content of that material? Well, it's very, very diverse, and it comes to the world in a scrambled and sporadic, erratic fashion of disorganization. Nevertheless, it is possible to survey the entire material and draw from it certain themes. And what is the main theme of the Nag Hammadi material? What is the main topic of the contents of those different tracks, those 52 different documents? If you synthesize it and distill it into the main content, what is the main content? Well, it's about the Aeon Sophia, whom the Gnostics consider to be the sovereign intelligence of the earth. So the signal points you to the source by which you can decrypt the signal, by which you can confirm that who the source or what the source of the signal is. I should also point out, by the way, that not only did I identify the source, but I explained, described in meticulous detail how the signal was operating, how it found its way into the human psyche. I showed how and why the signal produced these anomalies of memory. After all, that is what the Mandela effects are. They are anomalies of human memory. They are evidence of a kind of split in human memory into two different memory tracks. And I explained exactly why the signals produce this effect in the human mind, what is the intention of the supernatural agency controlling the signal. All of this is set out in talk after talk with textual backup on the original work on the channel. So now to come around as quickly as I can to the conclusion of this talk, let me just mention two more points very quickly. In my process of breaking the cipher and reading the message coming through the Mandela Effect signals, I identified what I called 3 superclusters. You see an illustration of one of the superclusters in the image that comes along with this upload. That would be the first supercluster, which I called the Ford-VW Supercluster. And as you can see, the supercluster is organized in the form of a jigsaw puzzle. So what I showed is that there were particular Mandela effects that fitted together and referred to each other so that they formed a huge cluster of effects, a congregation or configuration of effects. And contained in all of those effects, there was one specific message. And I made it explicitly clear what that message was. So there was a message coming through the first supercluster, the Ford-VW Supercluster. There was a second one, which was linked to the first supercluster through Peanuts and Charles Schulz and Lucy, and I called the second supercluster the Lucy Supercluster. So that had to do with I Love Lucy, Desi Arnaz, the Lucy cartoon figure in Peanuts, and other related clues that formed a constellation. I'm talking about specific, concrete constellations of examples of the Mandela effect. I constructed these constellations meticulously. Finally, I identified a third supercluster, which I call the vampire supercluster. And of course, the signal piece in that supercluster was interview with a vampire, interview with a vampire. A really powerful Mandela effect that threw a lot of people. And for that Mandela effect, there was a tremendous amount of residual evidence of the former or occluded effect. The occluded effect being the one that formerly was remembered but does not correspond to the evidence as it stands today. So I took extreme care to develop the evidence to construct these superclusters, but I did not construct them out of my own invention. I constructed them on the basis of the way that the signal was cohering. The signal coming from the PSI, the Planetary Sovereign Intelligence, had a coherent purpose. It formed itself into an intelligible constellation in the human mind, if I may use that language. And I identified the constellations that it formed and the messages in those constellations in the 3 great superclusters. So then finally, in the process of doing all that, through the course of the summer of the year 2017, it became obvious to me around July or August of 2017 that the Mandela Effect was changing, and it was going to phase out in its initial form, in the form of anomalies of memory. And I dedicated close attention to how the effect was working. I asserted that it would phase out, and I called that the phase 1 of the Mandela Effect, and that it would start operating in another way in phase 2. And I showed why. I explained how the planetary sovereign intelligence, which is the Aeon Sophia, the Earth Mother, if you wish, was breaking into the human mind, and that the first way that she got attention of human beings was to produce these anomalies of memory. But she didn't stop there. She went even deeper into the human mind. She went directly into the immediate field of human attention, which you can call the exopsyche, the field of the collective attention, and she brought the signal to the attention of the world in a different way, and that was the evidence of that change occurred in October of 2017 with the event in Las Vegas called the Mandela Bay shooting. And I showed at that time how the Mandela Bay shooting and a couple of other events that caught the attention of the world shortly thereafter gave the evidence that the Aeon Sophia had phased out the memory effects of the Mandela Effect and phased into a different use of the signal. And I showed exactly how she did so, and I verified that claim, that theory, if you will, by looking at the direct evidence in the events of the shooting in Florida, following the shooting in Las Vegas. I also decoded these events, but in a different way than I had decoded the anomalous memories, which were the indication of phase 1 of the Mandela Effect. So I followed it in a full spectrum analysis all the way through phase 1, brought it down into phase 2, and then I explained that it was fading out because she had achieved her purpose. What was her purpose? Well, her purpose was to get the attention of some human beings who had the interest and the capacity to decrypt the signal and to warn them about specific matters, such as toxoplasmosis. Kit Kat. Toxoplasmosis was one of the warnings contained in the message encoded in the first supercluster. Other warnings about genocide, genocidal plans, and nefarious agencies working against the happiness and well-being of the human races all showed up in my investigation in no uncertain terms. So there you have it. Currently, none of that content, either spoken or written, is available on the internet, but it will be made available again through the Sophianic School of Arts and Sciences, and it will be presented in a new format in Course 10 on mythophrenia. There you have it. There's my summary of what I did on my channel, how I did it, and the intention behind doing it. So I wanted to conclude by saying this channel is now closed. This is the only talk that will remain publicly available on Mandela Effect Decoded. And if you would like to continue and take an interest in what I have to say as the Gnostic teacher on the internet, well, then you can follow the links provided in the description. And on that note, I conclude with the salutation I used for those uploads on Mandela Effect Decoded. May your attention be rewarded by the truth.